Hi, welcome to the Ninth Age Fantasy Battles. Today I'm going to be taking you through the 2022 final beta changes for the Undying Dynasties. I do want to mention before I fully jump in that I'm just going to be going through what the final changes are. I'm going to discuss and talk a little bit about what the original changes were back in December, but only as they relate to these final changes. I do encourage you to go check out those original changes because some of the things that were changed are still persisting through, and I'm just not listing them out because they already were changed. So that's how my brain works. I do want to provide some context and disclaimer. The points changes that are across the board, across all the armies, are there to help the low and mid tier armies. And these are, like I said, these are the final changes before the books become gold again, and they're set for the rest of 2022. But there probably will be a hot fix in the next couple weeks that are going to fix just some minor errors. If you do spot something that slipped through the cracks, just let a staff member know. All right, so here we have the character changes. Uh, so, like I said, these are pretty minor changes across the board for characters, but maybe they help you out because I know when I'm character building, sometimes I end up with 1810 points and I go 10 points over my character section, and that 10 points kind of ruins the whole build, and it's hard to, tweak that without losing something. So, you have the Pharaoh was 240 in 2021. They didn't touch it at all in the first beta patch, but now it's 235. What I do want to mention, I'm just going to skip down to the no mark. They did the same thing with the no mark. They reduced that by 5. And from what I could tell, that is because with the first beta patch, they changed a lot of the weapon costs and made them 5 points more expensive in some places or 5 points cheaper. They also actually I think the weapons cost they mostly reduced the cost in the first beta patch. What they increased was the cost of a lot of mounts. So in this beta patch, they're reducing the cost of the Pharaoh and the Nomarch by 5, which slightly offsets the cost of the mounts because the mounts are now a little bit more expensive, like 10 or 20 points, depending on what mounts you were choosing, like the skeleton horse or the chariots. And so they reduced the base cost of it because it's not like anyone was really spamming pharaohs or nomarchs. So that just kind of helps offset it and gives you more options. Like I'm showing here, the halberd was reduced by 5 points. The heavy armor was reduced by 5 points. For nomarch, the paired weapons and halberds and great weapon all got reduced by 5 points as well. The casket of fat tap went down by 5 points. And see Harbinger. So they reduced that originally by 5 points, and now with this final patch, they brought that down another 5 to 140. So I guess I felt like that wasn't quite enough to help it out. And with the halberds on the Harbinger, that also came down 5 points. And the Tomb Architect is reduced by 5 points. So it's just some generic stuff. They increased the cost of the mages, the wizards across the board, but now they're bringing down the cost by 5 points here and there for a lot of the melee or combat centric characters, which slightly offsets that cost of the wizards actually. So I know a lot of wizards went up by like 40 points, so this doesn't help all the way, but it does help some of the way, especially because often you're going to be bringing 2 or 3 of these characters. So, all right, core changes. Core changes are always the ones that make me just a little bit more excited, even because that's where you can really get some major savings. So you've got skeletons were 150 with additional points at 7. They've now brought that down to 145 for the base cost. So that's only going to help you if you are bringing more units of skeletons. So they didn't touch the additional points at all for these guys, but now you can just kind of spam them. I mean, it's only 5 points per unit, but I don't know. You could bring 5 units of 20, and now you just save yourself 50 points. No, not 50 points. 25 points. I guess you could bring... You wouldn't want to bring 10 units of these guys. Anyway, Skeleton Cav were 165 and 12. They brought them the additional points down to 11 originally, and then just to help them out, they brought that down to 160. So now a unit of Skeleton Cav, you usually see these guys in at least units of 10. So you save 5 points and 5 points. So if you bring in a unit of 10, you save yourself 10 points. Maybe you can squeeze in a banner where you couldn't before. Or, I mean, a standard bearer, not a banner. Because oftentimes I find maybe I couldn't squeeze in the full command group, depending on my list. So that's really what that's going to buy you. Skeleton Scouts are a little bit interesting. They were at 140 with 11 points for additional models. In the first beta patch, they increased that cost to 150, but reduced the additional points down to 9. So if you brought bigger units of scouts, like 10, they cost the same, but if you only brought units of 5, they were 10 points more expensive. Now they're walking that back a little bit and bringing down the base cost down to 145. So if you're only bringing 5, they're 5 points more expensive than they were in 2021, but if you're bringing 10, they're actually 5 points cheaper. Is that right? Than they were. So I know with scouts, you generally only going to bring about 5 of them because they scout, they vanguard, they're really great as chaff. So they made your chaff a little bit more expensive, but they're still a good deal. Chariots. Chariots were 290 and 75 for the additional. They brought down the base cost down to 270, but didn't touch the additional points in the first beta patch. But then they brought down the base cost even more to 265, and then the additional points down to 74. So now that's for the unit of 3. If you bring a unit of 6, you're saving yourself 3 points from the additional models, which is nothing. And then, but you are saving yourself 25 points from the base cost. So it's 28 points cheaper for a unit of 6. And then if you made them Legion Charioteers, you're saving yourself another 12 points for a total savings of 40 points. So 40 points cheaper for a unit of 6 chariots with Legion Charioteers upgrade is pretty good. Pretty good. I always consider them pretty good value as they were, and 40 points cheaper is always nice. I did also want to mention that if you take the Lord of the Barrel Legion, then the Skeleton Archer's heavy armor upgrade, it used to cost 1 point, and now it's free. It's 0 points. So that'll help you out for those of you who play the Lord of the Barrel Legion. Let's take a look at special changes. Necropolis God were 190 and 16 points for additional models. They brought that down to 15 points for additional models, kind of incentivizing taking bigger units of Necropolis Guard. And then they brought down the base cost to 185. So now it kind of works both ways. If you want to spam Necropolis Guard, they're a little bit cheaper. Or if you want to bring big blocks, they're also cheaper. So I guess that kind of points to the fact that some felt Necropolis Guard maybe were a little underperforming, and they can give them a boost. They did, however, in the beta patch 1, increase the paired weapon cost to 4 from 3, which is kind of offset by the additional models. So if you bring a unit of 20 with paired weapons, at the end of beta patch 1, they would have cost the same. Now, if you bring a unit of 20 with the paired weapons, they're going to cost 5 points cheaper. So, there you go. Tomb Cataphracts got a little bit bigger changes, and this is where we're going to start to see a pattern that I'm going to point out. Tomb Cataphracts were 300 and 110 for additional points. They reduced the base cost down to 295. So that's only 5 points because usually you're only going to see one of these units. Sometimes you see 2, but not most of the time. But here's the interesting thing. They brought down the underground ambush in the first beta patch from 17 down to 10. Okay. You'll see at the bottom here, the Scarab Swarms, they also adjusted that underground ambush. They didn't touch that further in the second beta patch, but the that just looked like they're trying to incentivize more of that underground ambush because it's a pretty expensive upgrade to do for a lot of the units in the Undying Dynasties book. So they're just making that a little bit cheaper. Shopties were 210 with 80 for additional models. They brought that down to 200 for the first, I think they come in units of 4, and then 78 for additional models. Pretty minor decrease, but again, every little bit helps. Great Vultures were 155 and 21. They brought that down to 19 for additional models and 150 for the base cost in the beta patch 2. Having cheaper chaff is always a nicer thing. Scarab Swarms are 130 with 44 additional models. In the first patch, they brought that down to 120, but then they increased the additional points to 45. So a unit of 4 was still going to cost the same. And now they're bringing down the additional points down to 44. So if you bring additional models of Scarab Swarms, it just kind of evens out. Ancient Ordinance changes. You've got Shopty Archers for 200 and with 94 for additional. In the first beta patch, they brought that down to 185, so the archers were getting a lot cheaper. Compare that to the base Shopties, which are now 200. Shopty archers, they further reduced down to 180, and additional models are 93. Compared to Shopties, where additional models are 78. So it's cheaper to bring a small unit of archers, but more expensive if you make it larger than the regular unit of Shopties, which is kind of interesting. Stand Stalkers were 240 and 62. They brought down the additional points cost to 57 in the original patch. And then they brought down the base cost down to 235 and additional points down to 56 in this second patch. Again, I just want to point out the fact that Underground Ambush is cheaper for the Sandstalkers. So that all combined helps out. And then the Charnel Catapult was reduced from 200 down to 195. I already thought these things were pretty good, but who's not going to say no to another 5 points? Decrease. So then we have Entombed, and I combined the Mason's Menagerie together because there weren't that many things in the Entombed. So we have the Sand Scorpion at 175. It wasn't touched at all originally, but they brought that down 5 points to 170. So again, that's often used as chaff or some sort of hunter behind enemy lines. So those are always nice to have for cheaper points because they're considered pretty expendable. Now here's a really interesting thing. Like I said, I think it was in a different video. Generally across the board, monsters had their points increased. Well, with the Undying Dynasties, the Battle Sphinx and the Dread Sphinx, they've actually brought down. Battle Sphinx was 480 and now it's 470. And the Dread Sphinx was 450. They originally brought that down to 440 and now it's down to 430. So Dread Sphinxes are 20 points cheaper than they were. Tomb Reapers were 320 with 200 for additional models. They brought that down to 310 with 190, and now they're bringing that down even further, 305 for the first 2, and then 186 for additional models. So watch out for more Tomb Reapers. They did increase the cost of paired weapons, though, so bringing the additional models down will slightly offset that cost of paired weapons if you're bringing bigger units. I tend to see these in units of 4, so that's kind of where you see that. The Colossus was 415. It originally, only its upgrades were touched in the first patch, with the paired weapons going from 15 to 25, and Scales of Destiny going from 25 to 15. They flip-flopped. But then, just with the Sphinxes, they brought that Colossus down to 405, a 10 points decrease. So across the board, you can basically bring like 1 Sphinx and 2 Colossi, or 2 Sphinxes and 1 Colossi in a 4,500 point army. And these types of changes only save you 40 points or something. So you're not going to be able to see a third monster or a fourth monster in there necessarily. But if you weren't spamming monsters in UD, Maybe you were bringing more Tomb Reapers or something. Having cheaper monsters across the board does help because you can then take that 40 points and stick that into your Shopties, which are now 78 points. So those are all the changes that I have for the Undying Dynasties. Let me know what you think. Do any of these changes make you more excited to play Undying Dynasties this year in 2022? Do any of these changes turn you off, make you not want to play Undying Dynasties? Like I mentioned, I'm kind of excited about these Dread Sphinxes and the Colossi. I have a paired weapons Colossus and I have a great weapon Colossus and I have a Dread Sphinx, and I'm really excited to keep using those. I also love chariots. I think I own about 20 of them. And so the fact that chariots got cheaper makes me pretty excited. And I'm working on some of my other armies right now, but these changes to the Undying Dynasties make me think twice and say maybe I should put my other armies aside and actually finish painting my Undying Dynasties so I can play with these guys. So there you have it. I hope that you will have fun playing with your Undying Dynasties in 2022 with these final changes.